Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Purpose for Performance, brought to you by YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. My name is Ken Inadomi. I'm the chair of YANA, and it's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome you to today's program and to introduce our speaker, Nell Derick Debevoise, who was the founder and president of a remarkable social impact company, Inspiring Capital. Today's presentation really is a continuation of an ongoing conversation that YANA is hosting. And we are delivering this material in the form of webinars, which really are designed to provide the very latest and the most valuable content for social change leaders. I also should remind our audience that YANA is a completely 100% independent 501c3. We are a nonprofit, totally volunteer-led. And if any of our programming or events or today's webinar, if you derive benefit from it, please consider becoming a supporting member, because your contribution of any size will go a long way in helping to advance our work, which really is to connect and convene our growing mission-driven community to advance social change. And speaking of social change, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker. Nell Derick Debevoise is a thought leader. She is a change maker. And whenever you're in her presence, listening to her, you get the unmistakable impression that you're with someone who truly knows her passion, her purpose, and her areas of impact. Can't wait to hear what she has to share today from all of her hard-won insights. So now, here's Nell.
Thank you so much, Ken, for a kind introduction, and to YANA in general for putting this on. I've been interacting with YANA since we decided, I think, the 2014 conference. I'm a little more crimson. This is my muted crimson that I'm representing here, but have some good friends and family on the Yale side. So I've come to terms with it, particularly for all of the great momentum and interest that you all are building around nonprofit careers and support and work, which is a delight to see. And my alma mater may not be quite so strong in some of that. So congratulations to you all for that. It's great to be here. We have a handful of folks here in the room in New York. And so if you notice my eye contact shift back and forth a little bit, I'm being with them as well. And really great interest. We were excited about the response of almost 200 folks, I guess, signed up for today's session. I think purpose is a really timely thing, which could be a whole nother session or keynote, but just to say briefly, I think, you know, it's not new, I think is one thing that's important to say. A lot of the history and what we look at thinking about purpose and how to find it and why to find it really is pretty historical in a lot of cultures. Japan has a lot of amazing work dating way, way, way back about the reasons to get up in the morning is how they talk about purpose. But I think it reflects, you know, unfortunately, some hard times in the world today. Right? If everything were going great, we might not be so worried about our purpose and impact in the world because we'd just be carrying on. But things aren't going so great in our country, in our city, in the world. There is good out there. I don't want to start on a depressive note, but I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the craving that I certainly see and that I think today is a symbol of is from some hard times that we're all living. So anyhow, we will get into the session. I'm going to share the slides that I'll take you through for the next 35 or 40 minutes, which should leave us some good time at the end for questions. So please do jump in or take note. If you want to chat things throughout, I think you're welcome to, but we will have dedicated time at the end for Q&A. And so what we're going to talk about today is this notion of purpose for performance. And so you know, I worked in the nonprofit space for 10 years, got pretty frustrated, frankly, at the way that we have set that system up to fail with the short-termism, year-to-year grants, government funding that don't allow for things like marketing and staff and overhead, which any business person knows are critical to success. So I went to business school and then started Inspiring Capital shortly after to really think about how can we integrate doing good for the world, really important, especially in times like these, with business principles and skills that we need to run our economies and our banks and our homes and make shoes and do all of these fundamental things that are very critical. How can we bring that all together rather than this pretty American notion of I'll work really hard, be kind of miserable, make a ton of money, and give it all back later, which, as Jan pointed out here in our conversation before we signed on, may or may not necessarily always happen, that giving away part. And plus, you've wasted a bunch of decades being miserable, which is what was my kind of aha moving back to New York and seeing all these zombies. I'm like, this is the best city in the world, and you're all so educated and so wealthy and so privileged to have all this access, and you're walking around like zombies. So I really believe in the notion of purpose for performance. It's an enlightened self-interest, right? It's not about a woo-woo nice to have or some, should. My mother taught me to, tithe at the end of the year or to, give money to the person on the street. It's about well-being, and it's about well-being on an individual level. It's about well-being on an organizational level and at a larger community level. That we need to find the sense of purpose, I think, to reorient and anchor to the successful, creative, healthy capitalist society that I think we can be. It's not anything other than that. So I'll share a little bit of some of the research and background on my thinking and Inspiring Capital's thinking as it's evolved on purpose for performance, and then our particular framework that we've developed to think about that throughout your whole life, right? So it's not just what you do Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 or 8 to 8 in many of our cases, but rather what you're buying, how you're living, how you're raising families, all that more holistic approach, and then some ways how to find it. I will give you some time to think through a little bit of this throughout, and then there's a digital coaching tool that I'll provide at the end to keep some of the follow-up, because probably none of this is brand new or rocket science, but hopefully a useful new framework to think about it. But frameworks need to be used, and so it's the ongoing piece and your own interaction that will be really powerful. So with that, let's dive into some of the background and research. The statistic on the left was published in Harvard Business Review a few years ago out of research by Bain. And what you'll see is that they use satisfied employees as the baseline for productivity. If any of you read Gallup or work in an office, you'll know that satisfied employees are not the norm, to be clear, right? Gallup talks about engagement, and it's about less than 30% of the workforce is engaged, right? And somewhere under half satisfied. So, but for now, let's say we're taking satisfied as the baseline, which is 100% productivity. If you're engaged, you're actively coming to work, you're thinking about what you're doing, you're talking with colleagues, you're maybe learning a little outside of work, great, you're almost half as much productive again. But if you're inspired, if you're connected to some purpose outside of the company, beyond yourself, beyond the share price, you now are more than doubly as productive. So probably a lot of us have felt or seen that, right? I know a lot of people in the audience obviously have a nonprofit connection, whether that's your day job or whether you're a board member. And so you've probably felt moments of this inspiration and how it can really light the fire, right? You get up out of bed faster, you come to work more willingly, you do a better job. But I just think that this math is so important to show and share, not only for us all as ambitious professionals ourselves wanting to be productive. If you could double your productivity, why would you say no to that? But also as managers and leaders, right? If you could more than double your team's productivity by linking to some idea in the bigger picture about why their work matters, and double, I mean, yes, that's a magic drug that none of us could say no to. So that's one thing that is very important. There's a ton of other research below this and beyond this. I'll share my email at the end, and if people are looking for any additional resources, I'm super happy to share, because it really is well documented. This is not anymore like show me the research or it's not proven. It really is from a number of angles. On the right, this is one of my favorite pieces, because you're just less likely to die when you have a sense of purpose. And so if productivity wasn't good enough for the Ivy League type A's among us, how about not dying, or dying later? You will still die. So good news, bad news. But this too is a conclusion that sits on top of a lot of specific research about heart disease, about dementia, about levels of stress and anxiety, about suicide, right? That there's numerous factors that having this sense of purpose make you physically and mentally better. And so again, there's a ton of research under this little tip of the iceberg, but I always like to start there because I think it's important to remember that this is not a green juice woo-woo 21st century millennial fad. It really is the way to build better lives, careers, companies, and communities. The next piece of this, before we move on, is also research written up in Harvard Business Review by a professor or the head of a center at NYU, Tansy Whalen, who's an incredible resource. She was the head of the Rainforest Alliance for a decade or more, and now has been at NYU building out their Center for Sustainable Business. And so these are 6 features that she identified through research, and she's done more since, that help companies' performance, or the ways that having a sense of purpose and connection to impact drives company performance. And so I will kind of leave them there. If you want the full HBR article, again, happy to share that. Also a whole nother session that we could do, but I just think it's important to think of some of these very business-driven elements like improving risk management, right? So climate change is a super easy one to think about there, that if you're not thinking about where the New York river lines will be in 5 years or next month if we have a storm, or certainly 10, 20 years, as a waterfront real estate owner, you're not being very responsible about your business planning, right? And so, again, for better or worse, because of where we're at, whether it's social inequality, whether it's climate change, a lot of these issues are really just core existential risks. And so for some of the people who perhaps are less keen or aligned with integrating environmental, social governance factors, or this notion of purpose into business or investing, I think that's a nice kind of bottom line risk aversion angle that you can use. Obviously on the upside, innovation, really it's been shown that constraints help innovation. And so thinking about some of these elements of purpose or impact can really help find new ways of doing things. Improving financial performance has a few drivers like price premiums, customer loyalty, which is the next bullet, but also cost savings. A fair number of green initiatives also happen to reduce cost, which is always nice. And this last point is the kind of headline for the way we think about this all, which is attracting and engaging employees, right? So that gets back to our point today of helping to find purpose as something that improves performance and thus good for the company bottom line. So a lot there, but not our primary thrust for today. So I'm going to keep moving. And before we get to really the micro individual purpose level, I just want to share this headline. If we were live together, I would ask for a show of hands, but just a few weeks ago in the kind of doldrums of August, 181 CEOs, including the CEOs of Amazon, IBM, Northrop Grumman, so 30% of the US market cap. The CEOs came together and decided that they were publicly standing up to say shareholder primacy is over. That is not how we live and operate our companies. Again, a whole separate session on kind of the history and evolution of responsible corporate living to managerialism to Milton Friedman and now to today. And so there's a ton written on this. I have a piece on Forbes that has my take, and there's dozens of other articles over the last few weeks about, does this matter? Is it good? And I would love to get more into it in Q&A if people are seeing ripples from this, or if you have questions about what it means. I guess what I would say briefly is, it's a statement, right? It's simply a statement. It's a statement signed by 181 CEOs representing 30% of American market cap. So it's a weighty statement, but it's not the answer. Right now, the work needs to be done. There's been a lot of backlash. Jamie Dimon is the chair of this committee and talking about, well, what about JP Morgan Chase's income inequality or gender or race profiles or investments, and that is all really valid. He has a lot of work to do. But putting the stake in the ground is courageous, in my opinion, and it's something that we can now all hold him and his peers accountable for. So I'm excited about it. But again, happy to dive into that more and curious to hear other people's thoughts. And so now, before we shift focus to the purpose mapping for each of our own lives, I wanted to give or share what's hopefully a gift in the middle of your busy days, and just take a moment to breathe and settle in a little bit. So I'm going to ask you, I can't see you in control, but it's going to be just on trust. Kind of get yourself comfortable, get your feet both solidly on the ground. My group here in New York is being very participatory, so we're just going to send that energy out to all of you. And wherever you are on this Tuesday, midday or morning or night, just shake your shoulders out. If you've got some creaks and kinks, get those feet on the floor. And then no matter where you are, nobody will laugh at you, I promise. Close or avert your eyes down. And take what maybe is the first deep breath of your day, all the way down into your belly. Just take a deep breath in. And at least in the Northern Hemisphere, coming off summer, I want you to pick one of those sunny, glowy, warm, glittery summer moments. Maybe there was ice cream involved, or a pool or water, the ocean, or a tree, or air conditioning, whatever it might have been, but just reclaim one precious summer moment and hold it in mind while you take a few deep breaths. Knowing that summer can be so fleeting, just really hold on to that moment of warmth or glitter as something that you can come back to in your hectic commute or late nights of work or stressful meetings. Take one more breath into it. And then I'll ask you to come back. Hopefully a little bit more present and ready for the next 35 minutes or so that we have together, to really appreciate and absorb some of the content in the midst of what is undoubtedly a busy day. And so I want to talk about impact and purpose. And this is an illustration that we use to talk about impact, right? So really simply, something that you do that causes something else to happen. Right? Super simple. Again, it's buzzy, impact and purpose and impact investing and all of this. And so I think it's easy to overcomplicate, but I really like to keep it simple and just think, what is it that you do or could do that would cause something else to happen in the world? And in this context, we're going to say something good to happen. Obviously, there are plenty of negative impacts. And so what I want you to do now, just for 60 seconds, is to think about all of the little sparks of impact that you've had that come to mind. This is a brainstorm, no judgment, really open-minded. It could be 22 years ago, it could be this morning, it could be this summer or last year. Really be open-minded with yourself and just do a quick stream of consciousness brainstorm about anything that you did, personal, professional, micro, macro, that you did and caused something else positive to happen in the world. I'm going to set a timer here for 60 seconds. And so take a journal or your phone, or if it's easier to just close your eyes and do it in your head, that's acceptable too. But just a quick impact brainstorm, and then we'll move forward. About 10 more seconds. Wrap up any other thoughts. Great. So we start there because I think, again, impact and purpose have gotten really overcomplicated, overpopulated, mystified. My purpose is really to demystify this for folks and find ways to bring impact and purpose into our day-to-day lives without making massive, difficult, costly changes to our lives, right? Maybe there's a time for that, and that's great, but I really think it's so doable in a very adjacent, approachable way. And so we think of impact as those things that you do, right? And maybe it's teaching kids to read, maybe it's helping kids persist through college, maybe it's researching cancer cures, that there's myriad versions of impact. And all of those actions, in my view, ladder up to your sense of purpose, right? And so I think, what's your life purpose? We asked that on the survey, and there were some interest, a wide range of answers, some being like, it's private, fair. Others very clear and well elucidated, others blank, but I think that's a very intimidating question depending on where you're at in your life. Whereas hopefully you found in this brainstorm exercise, oh, right, this morning, I took an extra minute with my daughter to review homework, or I made, eggs quickly for my husband, even though I was racing out because I know he's on antibiotics and he needs to eat in the morning, or I, had a great feedback session with one of my direct reports. Whatever it might be, there are all those little impacts throughout our lives that we're having. And if you pay attention, they start laddering up to a theme, right? Generally, we are ourselves. And so everything we do is often in a certain line. We have a thing for animals or the environment, or we like big macro systems change. So we're always reading and writing to representatives versus maybe very direct service. So I think it's helpful to just take note of these impact moments to ladder up to a purpose, and then hopefully trickle that back down to having even more impact. There was a great question in one of the surveys about the difference between mission and purpose. And so I just wanted to address that now before moving ahead. I think of mission as being a specific mission, right? Like you might think of in a military context, or, certainly in the nonprofit context, we're very familiar with that mission statement. But I think that tends to be a bit more specific, whereas purpose is a bit more overarching and broad, and so we might think of our purpose being somewhat consistent, maybe it evolves, but consistent over life, but we have moments of different missions, right? I think my initial mission with Inspiring Capital was really to help nonprofits think about earned revenue strategies. And so we built a way to do that and continue to do it in some ways. My personal thrust these days is really a mission, again, to bring impact and purpose into people's day-to-day lives and work. So all under the purpose of using business skills and capitalism for good, but in different mission ways. So hopefully to that questioner and anyone else who was wondering, that is a helpful differentiation. And so with that, I'm going to move into Inspiring Capital's 2 frameworks, which ladder up to our impact dashboard. The first is the spectrum of impact. And what we talk about here is this kind of rainbow graphic that you're seeing. The idea being that all firms, regardless of sector, for-profit, nonprofit, public, or blended, can, and in my view, should drive environmental and social impact. Right, so the nonprofit sector is about 7% of US GDP these days. In my opinion, we need more than 7% of change. And so I think other organizations, other parts of the economy need to weigh in. And they do it in different ways, which is great, but everybody needs to be thinking about it. The challenge is that everybody needs to be thinking about it. The opportunity, in my view, is that we can all take part, whether we're corporate employees as board members, whether we're nonprofit employees as consumers and investors, right? We can all play in different ways across the spectrum. So these are pretty self-explanatory, but to walk you through briefly, government is government agencies, local, federal, state, and so on. Nonprofits, again, you all know intimately well. There are millions, right? I think we're up to a few million now in the US of all different sizes and causes. Social enterprise is this somewhat emerging, not that new, but getting more attention sector where you have a purpose, but you also have a very clear profit motive, right? And so I there's varying definitions. I define social enterprises as for profit, for purpose. These three examples are all also certified B Corps, as is Inspiring Capital, my company. I don't think that's a prereq, right? There are plenty of organizations that call themselves and are valid social enterprises that haven't necessarily certified as a B Corp. That's another thing we can address in Q&A. Again, a whole separate session for another day, but B Corp certification is something that I think is an exciting piece of this movement. Finally, the corporate sector is the bulk of our economy and very important. You know, these folks don't have an obligation to achieve any social or environmental purpose necessarily, though this statement from the Business Roundtable puts a little bit into question their obligation to serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And companies like these, you probably know, are far from perfect. I would never make that argument, but they are doing some very interesting things to contribute to social and environmental impact. And because of their scale, can have pretty amazing outcomes, even if they're not quite as pure, perhaps, or as dramatic as some of the impact in the nonprofit space. So that's the spectrum of impact. And then next, I want to show you the full my why diagram, which takes the spectrum and then adds spheres of impact. And so that's what we're going to go through briefly now. The first bottom foundation of our diagram really starts with the self, very intentionally in that core center area, right? So it's the airplane oxygen mask metaphor, right? If you're not getting air or whatever else you need to survive and thrive, you are of not much use to the people around you. And I feel very strongly about this, having worked in the nonprofit sector for 10 years, the level of burnout and, you know, overwork and under care, whether it's financial, time, energy, resource, whatever it might be, is really a problem because we can't possibly be of best service to the beneficiaries we're trying to work with. So we start there. What are you doing for your mindfulness, your well-being, mentally and physically? And then around self, what about your family and friends, right? What a direct way to have impact in the world, whether it's raising the next generation, whether it's caring for the elderly in a dignified way, influencing friends, supporting neighbors, all of that is really valid impact too. And I think often we give ourselves less credit than we could or should for that work that we do and its impact in the world. But then we come above the fold, if you will, and look at the job, right? Where most of us, many of us spend most of our waking hours at work. And so what you're paid to do on a daily basis matters and can have impact in a number of ways. The second thing we look to is your employer, right? So you might be an accountant, which in and of itself may not feel or look super high impact. But if you're an accountant at a fabulous nonprofit organization that's getting kids through college, you're making that happen, right? And so it may not be something that you feel on Tuesday afternoon as you review the books for Q3, but it's important to do for yourself or for your team to make that connection to that red dot, right? And get some of the benefits we saw at the beginning of having that sense of purpose beyond just, I'm in the numbers. Third, we look to your community. And so beyond your day job, what are you doing as a board member? Like I know so many of you serve as, or more informally, as a neighbor, as a volunteer, you know, as an advisor to the small business in your town that you shop at or whatever else it may be. And finally, your money. What do you buy? Right? What do you donate to? Certainly very important, and I imagine pretty top of mind for this group. And what do you invest in, right? And really getting at least conscious first about how those choices matter. So all of this together creates this dashboard. And I want to take you through an example briefly, and then I'm going to ask you to play with it yourselves a little bit. Hopefully if we can share slides after. And so if you want to maybe eventually print this out and plot some of your own impact thoughts, I think it's just a really useful ongoing tool. But so this is how I think about some of the impact in my life. We use the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which I imagine some of you are familiar with, but it's basically 17 goals that categorize quite thoroughly all of the change that the UN and its member countries see that we need to make in the world to have a happier, healthier planet. It's a global view, obviously, and so there are certainly some issues, perhaps in the US or other highly developed markets that might feel missing, or interestingly, there is not an SDG, for example, to talk about the arts, which I think is a massive gap. So I've had some interesting conversations with folks at the UN about that. But just to have a common language, because that is such a fraught kind of area. How do we measure impact? How do we track impact? How do we know what it is? We revert to this UN set of standards that just feel pretty universal. So I start on the bottom with that green square, which is good health and well-being is one of the UN SDGs. I'm very conscious about my own well-being. I work really hard and I'm really unpleasant and really unproductive if I don't do my 20 minutes of meditation in the morning. Try to be pretty thoughtful about, food and exercise and all these kind of things. So by no means perfect, but it's something that I think a lot about, and then spread, hopefully in a loving, gentle way to my friends and family without being too preachy or burdensome. So that's one thing that I think a lot about on my kind of inner personal side. Gender equalities, that great big red 5, another SDG, that's a big part of the work I do through Inspiring Capital and in the community. I care a lot about helping women to start businesses, but also to succeed in the workplace. Most of our programming is co-ed. I love men as well, and men who support women, and I think men are an incredibly critical piece of women's success. So that matters to me too. But that is, apart from the kind of integrating of business and purpose, the gender piece is really front of mind for me. And then finally, that little box 12 is SDG, responsible consumption and production. And so I put that out in my money sphere. As an entrepreneur, I don't necessarily have a ton of my own disposable income. My husband is in finance and is very supportive, which is a great and blessed thing for me. I would not be able to do a lot of what I do without that partnership. But I think a lot about what we buy, and buying from B Corps, trying to buy less and lasting reusable things. Again, we are really far from perfect on this. There's way too many Amazon boxes at my door than I would like to see, but just trying to do the work of remembering my water bottle in the morning and refilling it rather than using plastic, just little things that we can all do is another thing I think of. So anyhow, just to give you a sense, this dashboard is intended to be that, right? It's not a solution. It doesn't have answers, but the hope is that it can kind of be a repository and a framework for you to use as you think about, gosh, what am I doing and what can I take credit for on one hand, but also where do I feel gaps, and where would I like to do more? So in my case, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been working really, really hard on building this company for 6 years. And so I'm not on boards. I don't volunteer, frankly. I try to be generous with mentoring other entrepreneurs and people in our programs. But, there are some of those more formal things that I've just had to say no to. And for now, that's good, right? But at a certain point, I'm sure I'll want to reevaluate. And so you can see that kind of blank community section, or even the government nonprofit money, right? I make some very small annual or recurring monthly donations to a few nonprofits I care about, but I'm not really thoughtful at this point about my financial donations. So what I would love now is just for a few minutes, because we know from research and the hallowed halls of Yale and other great educational institutions that if adults don't do something, they don't really learn it. And so you can come back and listen to this recording as many times as is helpful. But if you just listen to me, it's never going to truly sink in. And so I'm going to set a timer for just 3 minutes. Our time together is not super long, and I don't want to lose folks. But I would really love for you to go back to that impact brainstorm that you made at the beginning of our session, and just start to think about plotting where those impacts fall on this graphic. And if the graphic doesn't work for you perfectly, maybe you just label them according to the sector or the sphere, however it might be, but just take a few minutes to think through where you're at currently with the impact you're having in your work and life. And then we will proceed. Feel free to highlight questions during this portion as well, and we can get to those in Q&A. About another 30 seconds here. All right, so hopefully that was just a taste. 3 minutes is not long at all. But again, I really encourage you, whether it's using this framework or other things that you've come across in your life, you know, these questions about impact that you're having in the world, and then that larger purpose question is such a big one. And so it's not going to be resolved in this 60-minute webinar. It probably won't be resolved in your Q4 planning for 2020. It really is the kind of thing that comes with time and evolves. But if you don't make some time to let it evolve and to help it evolve consciously, you know, those days and weeks and months and years can really fly by. And I think particularly our American work culture does not necessarily encourage this kind of bigger thinking. And so I would really encourage you to make time in your life, whether it's independently or with friends or family, colleagues, however most resonates. And so to that note, just a few kind of journal prompts. You know, when you mapped those impact points, think about some of these questions. Where are you feeling great? Where, you know, maybe you were like, gosh, I do make really healthy meals for my family several times a week. That's something these days, especially, right? That's important. Or, you know, yeah, I really am supportive of, you know, women at my workforce or other people that are from less represented groups. Or, you know, I've created a really safe space for gender fluidity, and that's become such a thing at our workspace. And I've really feel good about that impact. Or, I have reviewed my investment portfolio, right? Who knows what it might be, but hopefully there was something that you're like, oh, I should give myself a little credit for that. Of course, there may well be areas that we're keen to do more, right? A lot of people who signed up indicated some version of transition or seeking, right? And so were there any obvious areas of your grid, right? Was it like, oh, geez, I haven't been doing the self-care stuff. I need my oxygen mask, or something more external. And similarly, or maybe in the gap between these two areas, where are you lost or unclear? What's just a question mark? The fourth thing that I include just a little bit down is, where are you drawn? Because I think, again, in our society of high achievers and the background that YANA folks all share of really being strivers, it's easy to feel a lot of shoulds, you know, and we see the news and we think, oh my gosh, the Amazon, I need to be doing something about that, or the political situation or immigration, or, you know, whatever is so in our face right now. But we don't all need to fix everything. And in fact, we can't all fix everything. And so I'm actually a really big proponent, again, for doing this work and following your head, but also your heart and your gut. Where are you drawn? Because this is hard stuff to change, no matter how you're doing it, at your corporate job, in your investment portfolio, through donations, as a nonprofit employee. It's, you know, it's change. It's not easy, and it's coming face to face with some hard and ugly truths. And so if you don't do things that have some resonance and some energy giving for you, I promise you'll burn out sooner than later, and that's not good for any of us. So again, in a more complete live session, we would dig into this in small groups and really start to pick some of it apart. But for now, I'll just leave these with you for thinking, maybe in your commute home tonight, or over the weekend as you watch the beautiful full moon. And with that, move on to one of our favorite tactical recommendations. I'm very into charcoal toothpaste right now, which is part of the explanation for the graphic. But more than that, it's brushing your teeth, right? It's something that hopefully we do 2-3 times a day, maybe a little more if you're compulsive or a little less if you're traveling or busy. But it's a habit, right? It's something that happens over and over and over, and it's pretty much reflexive. And that's the way you make change, right? The metaphor that I think is maybe the most illustrative is if I say, I'm going to save $100,000 next year. When I wake up on January 1st, I could spend less money. I could push for a raise. I could make a risky investment and say that that'll save it, right? There's a million things I could do to reach this goal. But if I say, I'm going to make my lunch every day, thereby saving $17 a day. Yes, we live in New York, and that is the average cost of lunch in a day. Right, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to buy any coffee, and all my gifts are going to be handmade cards. And I know that that gets me up to $100,000. Those are habits that I can do. I can know if I'm doing them at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, did I buy lunch or did I not? Right, that's a very measurable, knowable thing to know and do. And at the end of the year, I have 100 grand. Whereas in the former case, I was just like, well, hopefully maybe the investment works, maybe the investment doesn't, right? So when you think about this notion of purpose, I think it's also really powerful to think about it from a habit perspective, rather than I'm going to find my purpose this year. What on earth would that look like? What would you do? And so it just becomes this like negative cycle of, I wanted to do this thing, but I don't know how to do it. And so I'm not doing it and I feel bad about myself. Whereas if you say, you know, every Sunday I'm going to take 45 minutes and read the piece of the newspaper that I'm most drawn to, because then you're learning, and who knows what new initiative you're learning about that maybe you can donate to or you can implement at your workforce, right? That's this concrete habit that you can follow up with. And that's the way that we really see change happen, and this in touchness with your sense of purpose. It also works really, really well if the self-care thing is something that you want to highlight. And so again, whether it's meditating for 20 minutes a day or 2 minutes a day, or whether it's doing a plank a day, or whether it's increasing your water or your sleep, any of these really basic things are important, just for that baseline well-being that you need to then think about any other impact in the world. And so the tool that I mentioned that I'm going to share with you now is this fabulous digital coaching thing that we've discovered and partnered with, because as a learning and development company, we have this challenge of doing fabulous, mind-blowing, engaging sessions, and then sending people off to their real lives, right? Where you have busy daily duties, whether it's work or home. I've said a ton fairly quickly, and so you're not going to retain it all, and you're all going to scatter, and hopefully you see each other at the next YANA gathering, but everyone else in your day-to-day life has not heard this wisdom and insight and data. So the solution is our virtual coach, Freddie. And so you'll write a quick action plan. It takes 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how you do it. And you have the option to actually pick supporters. So if you signed up today because you really are conscious of this drive for purpose being something that's topical and timely in your life, you'll have the opportunity to pick a few people to help you do whatever habits you think might be helpful, or single habit. And so we won't obviously take the time now because I want to get to questions and answers and hear what you're thinking about. But if you just jot down this URL, www.know.ly, and then the 6-digit code, 158565. You can do it super easily on your phone or on your computer. You'll see that little screen pop up where you can enter the code and hit next, and it'll narrate you through very simply a few questions to think about an action plan. I encourage you to be very simple and generous with yourself. Don't make it find my purpose. Make it, you know, research nonprofits once a month on the 1st or whatever it might be, and take 10 or 15 minutes to fill that out. Rest assured that the interface is very friendly. So those supporters who you name, if you choose to do so, it's not cumbersome. They don't get spammed. It's a very gentle, respectful kind of, hi, I'm Freddie. I'm hoping you might help out. Not burdensome or domineering at all. So feel free to nominate a colleague or a friend or a coworker or a fellow YANA member, perhaps, that you can touch base with. But it's just super important to have some nudge in these next 6 weeks to continue anything that you heard or thought today. And so that really brings us to the final 15 minutes or so of our time together, when I'm excited to hear questions, what you're thinking about. There's a bunch of contact information on socials as well as email. If you want the slides, please email me and we'll send out those files. We do events fairly often in New York, and we are launching an e-learning course on business for good in November. And so all of that information will be coming out over our socials in the very short few weeks to come. So please follow us on socials and reach out directly by email. But with that, I invite you in the chat box or in Q&A to send any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and we can address those for our final time together. There's one already on Q&A. The NOLI code is available for 7 days. You're welcome to share, but the point is kind of to follow up to this content that we've done today. So I think without the context of that, I'm not sure it would be super relevant. There is going to be a recording made available by YANA to members, and so they'll see the code in the webinar. So Rachel, feel free to share, but again, I'm not sure that it would be super useful without the context of the webinar. And the HBR article I can definitely share. There are 2. And I can probably type them out right now without throwing off the screen share. Zoom is so amazing. So grateful to Zoom for existing in the world. And so I'm going to chat 2 links. This first one from HBR is the source of the data on that very first slide about the drive of inspiration for productivity. And then the second one that I'm going to share is the 6 features or the 6 ways that sustainability can drive business performance. And voila, if you open your chat box, if you don't see that already, you should have those 2 links. The URL is in the chat box. I can put it maybe in the Q&A as well. And then it should be in all of your... Rachel, open the, I'm sending it through Q&A, but if you open the chat function, not just the Q&A, you should see both. Oh, all panelists, maybe that's the problem. Sorry, all panelists and attendees. Aha. Human error, not Zoom. Voila. What else? And people in the room open to, oh, great. Awesome, thank you. Ken has some good ones here. I'm just taking a, yes, social impact heroes, that's a great one. So I think I'll try to order these in sequence and we can get through them relatively quickly, but audience, keep other ones coming in and I'll keep an eye on the Q&A box. So readings to go deeper into purpose seeking. This is a pretty personal thing. And so there's a lot of different flavors of purpose. I'm a big fan of Oprah's Super Soul Conversations. I think that she's just absolutely thoughtful, and she's done a lot of work with Eckhart Tolle and some other folks that I think is really thought-provoking. It's not for everyone, right? And so take it or leave it. You know, I think some folks are really excited about a more, I'm just putting the screen back to Noli so you can use that. There's also a kind of more millennial angle at it that some people like, I think. Tim Ferriss has some interesting thoughts about life hacking that I would say touches on purpose. But I think often purpose gets pretty quickly to spirituality, and that's just so personal that I don't know that I can prescribe. You know, I can share what I like, but I do think it's a little bit more of a personal journey for whatever you find inspirational or illuminating around spirit and life purpose. some of the social impact heroes, again, they fall all along that spectrum, right? So I think what Muhammad Yunus has done for social business at the bottom of the pyramid is absolutely heroic, to be sure. Similarly, I think that Paul Pullman of Unilever and what he's done for mass global consumer goods industry is amazing. Unilever is not perfect. There's, you know, some very media-worthy kind of challenges, like the fact that they sell skin lightening creams in a lot of the world, right? And I don't feel good about that either. And they are doing a lot to get soap and hygiene distributed and reduce dysentery and child death, right? So again, I think it's hard to look for perfection in this world, but people trying to make change is what I find really heroic. There are myriad. Jacqueline Novogratz's work with Acumen and using philanthropic investments for commercial models to solve poverty is one that's been around for a bit, but really incredible. The Grandmother Project, I think it's called, training women to install solar and clean cook stoves in India is absolutely phenomenal. They have women with like a first to second grade equivalent education doing engineering level work at scale, which is really amazing. There are myriad. We do write and think a lot about them on our site and on our socials. So I'll go back to that screen and really do feel free to keep following. So Stanford Social Innovation Review is another great source for a lot of the social impact stories across the spectrum, nonprofit, for-profit, and so on. Other examples of profit meeting purpose, you know, to carry on the Unilever example, their healthy living brands, which are these that have either ingredients that are better for people and for the world, or packaging, or some combination, are the fastest growing brands in the entire Unilever portfolio by quite a stretch. I think it was 20 or 30% last year. And so that's been really good ammo for Paul Pullman and now his successor to say, look, we need to double down on this because we are selling more of this stuff that is purpose aligned or impact aligned. Danone is a total leader in this. Lorna Davis, who was CEO of Danone North America when they decided to become a B Corp, is a total hero and girl crush and friend and mentor of mine here in New York. And their CEO, Emmanuel Faber, who sits in Europe, has now committed to make the entire company a certified B Corp by 2021, which is a total, I mean, it's just unprecedented. B Lab is working really, really hard to figure out how to certify such a huge global company and actually building a whole multinational certification program. So I think they're a real thought leader. And one of the things that they've revealed is that they were able to get project financing debt from some European banks at a more favorable rate pending the continued progress toward B Corp certification. So basically, for some of the reasons I shared earlier, because B Corp certification measures and externally audits environmental factors, supply chain issues, employee issues, these banks felt, wow, if you're doing those things, you're a better credit risk for us. And so we're actually willing to give you a favorable rate on this loan because of that B Corp certification. And so, you know, cost of capital is a pretty solid argument here. How do I deal with a hand raised? Doug, go ahead and type maybe in a question. You raised your hand. Oh, Doug, can you hear us? Go ahead. I don't know how to manage that. Attendees. Lasagna, you can now speak. Maybe. Oh, sorry, Doug. Sorry to put you on the spot. But Lasagna, do you want to share anything? You had your hand up as well. Maybe not. We hear some feedback, but nothing else. Okay, we'll type a question in or raise your hand again. Now I know how to use that. So those are a few of the examples. On the nonprofit side, knowing that a lot of you are from that world, you know, we see incredible examples of earned income. We were working with Goodwill this summer, who obviously is a massive social enterprise. And so the specific thing that we were working with them on was improving their triage system, if you will, right? All the stuff that we so generously give to Goodwill and may or may not have massive value. We were helping them to have a better sorting mechanism, basically, so that they can identify Nikes, for example, versus kind of no name or other athletic shoes that don't have quite the same resale value. And so based on the project, we spent a few days in the warehouse sorting, and actually were able to increase, an average of about $1.50 that they get for an athletic shoe, up to $17 that they can get for Nikes. And so they figure Nikes are about 15% of their donation, of their shoe donations, which is something like, I wish I remembered the number, because it is a stymieing number of tons of athletic shoes that just the New York, New Jersey Goodwill gets on an annual basis. And so when you take that increase from $1.50 to $17, it's massive impact on their bottom line and the revenue that they're able to generate to then hire people who struggle to get jobs otherwise. And so that is a great example of a very kind of private sector business warehousing strategy serving an incredible mission that is Goodwill's. So I think I touched on at least many of those questions, and we are just about at time. Oh, Lasagna, no worries. So I think I'll maybe wrap it up there. There will be a recording available of this. Send me an email at nell@inspiringcapital.ly here on the screen at the bottom if you'd like to receive the slides or have other questions or follow-up. And otherwise, best wishes to YANA. Look very forward to staying involved as a supporting member. I encourage you all to do the same, and we will see you soon. Happy trails.